Dear fans and audience in front of the screen, good evening to you all. Welcome to the Chinese Building Association of New South Wales webinar. I'm Sophia, and I'm honored to be your host for tonight's online event. And firstly, let me introduce our association first. Chinese Building Association of New South Wales was established in January 2020. The association is dedicated to empower members, empower the construction industry, and empower the local community. The association aims to create a professional platform for communication to help members grow their business and to help the industry become better. As the only industry body that serves the building and development industry, we have gained around 350 member business, including developers, builders, contractors, suppliers, and other professionals, and 16,000 followers across all platforms. Chinese Building Association hosts a series of member events, including business events such as industry conference, building and development seminar, industry exhibitions, and summit. We aim to provide latest information about the building and the developing industry. If you are interested in our events and contents, please scan the QR code on the screen to add our WeChat assistant for the more information. And today's webinar is hosted by Willoughby Council, and the main topic is major projects updates with City of Willoughby Council. Firstly, let me introduce our guest speaker of tonight, Mr. Michelle Noble, Head of Planning of Willoughby City Council. Hi, Michelle. Say hi to everyone.
Hello.
Yes.
Hi.
And we're also very glad to have Ms. Jen Liang with us tonight. She's the strategic town planner of Willoughby Council. Michelle is very thoughtful for our Chinese community, invited Jen to do the webinar with us, and she will help Michelle to do the Q&A parts. If anyone wants to ask the question in Chinese, Jen is here to help us. Okay, now I will hand over the screen and host to our guest speaker of tonight. Michelle, you can share your screen with us, and please start your topic.
Thank you very much. I'll just share my screen. Hopefully that's coming up for you.
Yes.
Hi, everyone, and welcome. I'm Mitchell Noble. I'm the Head of Planning at Willoughby Council, and it's a pleasure to be speaking to you tonight about our new planning controls for Willoughby. On the 30th of June, our new LEP was made. That's our local environmental plan that sets all of the planning rules for the local government area, and our development control plan that supports it. So what I wanted to talk to you about today was that plan and its key features, really just focusing on the differences between the old one and the new one. And some exciting parts of that are the capacity it creates for new growth and development along our transport corridors, particularly in the Chatswood CBD, where we've expanded the growth area north and south and changed some of the planning rules to allow bigger development. I also want to talk to you about just some observations on trends with development applications. I know some of you here tonight may have been involved in development applications in the city in the past and might be presently and might be thinking about it in future. So I wanted to touch upon the way that we're doing things differently now that we have a brand new shiny set of controls that we're working with. So that'll be the agenda. As I mentioned, if you can save your questions to the end, that would be great, and we can have a generous Q&A session at the end so I can help you understand what's proposed in our new approach. Firstly, I just wanted to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands on which we meet today, the Gamaragal people. Well, certainly that's where we are, and communicate. And their connections to the land, waters, and community. We pay our respects to their elders past and present and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, including those who might be here today. So I've already been over the approach. Just in high-level terms, what we were aiming to do with our new planning controls is provide for capacity for growth in the right places throughout Willoughby Council. So we've got this amazing access to public transport through our metro and heavy rail lines and along our bus corridors. So we wanted to focus growth in those locations, expand and strengthen the Chatswood CBD, that strong office core that we already have. We want to support that with mixed use development to activate our CBD. And in doing that, we also want to improve the quality of new development. So introduce some new measures to ensure that the design of buildings in the Chatswood CBD and other areas are as good as they can possibly be. And that is supported by new sustainability measures, affordable housing requirements that are matched to our growth areas, so that we're only introducing this requirement where we believe it's feasible to do so. And in doing that, we're delivering on our commitment to review our LEP every 5 years. So this is the first time we've done that for a long time, and then delivering upon some key promises that we made in our local strategic planning statement. So that's the sort of high level context within which we were operating. Now, it wasn't just a plan or a document that we produced from the middle of nowhere. This is something that we've been working on for over 5 years. And the 30th of June was the culmination of all of that work. So, we had council-led policies like our urban design strategy for the Chatswood CBD. We had looked at our employment lands as well and done quite a thorough examination of whether we should make changes in that space. We had a housing strategy. We had a transport strategy and a resilience action plan. So lots of different documents that we consulted on separately that formed part of our new planning controls, which were then exhibited separately to the community and for public comment and endorsement by our councillors and the Department of Planning eventually. Of note as well is St Leonard's and Crow's Nest, an area to the south in the Willoughby local government area. The government set the strategy there, and we have reflected that strategy in our plans. So there's a legislative requirement for us to do that. There's 3 councils that own or that have carriage of the land and the planning controls in St Leonard's and Crow's Nest. We have just a small part at the very top that includes the station and the Royal North Shore Hospital. So I mentioned our local strategic planning statement, which set the planning vision. That said, we need to accommodate 6,700 new dwellings by 2036 in order to meet our the projected demand for growth in Willoughby local government area. And we also need to provide more affordable housing to ensure that people can, all different types of people and socioeconomic groups can afford to live in our local government area where housing prices are steeply rising like many other parts of the city. There's a map on the right-hand side there that shows you where we've chosen to focus growth, largely around Chatswood, but also the black dots indicate where our local centres are. And our local centres are our smaller scale commercial areas. Usually it's a social hub, some shops with some medium to low-rise, high-density development at places like Northbridge, Castle Crag, and North Willoughby. We were also looking at active transport. The aim in our local strategic planning statement is to ensure 55% of journeys to work are using modes other than the car. That's important because if we keep growing at this rate and just keep doing business as we normally have, we are looking at significant congestion on our roads. So we've had to think really carefully about that challenge. Heritage as well. How do we create large-scale growth and change opportunities throughout Willoughby whilst also protecting the existing character, particularly in Chatswood where heritage conservation areas butt up right against the CBD. We wanted to aim to create great local centres where there are opportunities for connection, for public transport and healthy eating and way of life through making sure that people are close within walking distance to open space and community facilities. And a key incentive here was for us to protect our employment land. So it's not just about housing. Jobs are important for us too. we have our commercial core in the Chatswood CBD, which we're retaining for employment uses, so trying not to allow residential there, in addition to our industrial lands, which serve an important economic purpose for broader Sydney. Critical to this as well was our tree canopy target, which is 40% by 2036, and our 30% emissions reduction target. So again, we're still sort of quite high level, and shortly I will get into the detail around what the new controls are. But when I talk about the new controls, we're talking about two layers: our local environmental plan and our development control plan. The local environmental plan being the higher order controls, the most significant controls that the council can, I guess, create and then guide development with, and a lower order but also important set of complementary controls in our development control plan. So in the local environmental plan, we wanted to grow the CBD, as we've mentioned, and increase density in our local centres. We wanted to give some more generous heightened density in our industrial zones, and introduced as a design excellence requirement, or a requirement for a design review panel, which I'll talk to in a moment. Also in the LEP is an increase of the affordable housing rate up to 10% in some locations, and I will take you through that detail in the slides to come. We also wanted to manage the urban heat impacts. So we have introduced a new clause that talks about the importance of deep soil zones, soft landscaping, materials and finishes to manage what we know will be a significant challenge in the future as our climate changes. In the development control plan, we strengthened our heritage controls through articulating exactly what steps we'd like to go through when there are proposals for changes to specific sites in heritage conservation areas and for heritage items as well. We have rejigged our parking rates and introduced EV charging requirements, and I will talk to those in more detail as the slides progress. So now I'm going to talk to you about exactly what parts of the LEP have changed, and it's not going to be every change, but these are the ones that I think are the most important to convey. Starting with a really administrative one, but the way that we label the zones has changed as a result of some state government reforms. So, you know, all of the B zones are essentially now E zones, going from sort of a business or industrial zone to what is, you know, an economic activity focused zone. So that there's a little table there to show you. But also worthy of noting that where we get a lot of our development is in the low density residential zone, the R2 zone and the C4 zone, and those zones stay the same in terms of their labels. We wanted to encourage good design throughout the local government area, and we already do that for large developments above 35 metres. We require a design excellence competition where the applicant convenes a panel of architects who compete for a design that is awarded, and then that becomes a concept scheme. So that already exists. We're not changing that, but what we have done is introduce a design review panel requirement, less onerous, to apply to development between 12 and 35 metres. So this is trying to get better outcomes for development that wouldn't otherwise be captured by the design excellence competition. And, you know, this would be development, you know, 3 or 4 stories up to 35 metres. We're imagining this will happen, or this does happen outside the DA process, so it doesn't impact on those timeframes. But it also is a way of offering advice to applicants to help shape those proposals in a more iterative way than the design excellence competition. The challenge we had, as I mentioned earlier, is in growing Willoughby local government area by 6,700 additional dwellings in an already tight environment for traffic, was that we needed to find a way to focus on improving our rate of modal split towards public transport. So how do we get people using walking, cycling, public transport more often than their car? Because if we use the car, we're going to have traffic models that don't work. We're going to have intersections that don't work. We're going to have very frustrated people and a very expensive infrastructure bill that, frankly, the council and state government won't be able to pay for anyway. But the great thing about Chatswood and Willoughby is that we have this fantastic metro system, well connected by buses and heavy rail as well. So that our approach has been to focus development along that corridor, where it's one of the most accessible places in Sydney, if not the country. And in doing that, and one of the best ways you can influence modal split is to provide reduced parking rates in new developments. So we're not taking parking spaces away from new developments, from old developments or existing developments, nothing like that. Just new developments, we're saying instead of having a target rate, we're going to have a banded rate with a very low minimum and a maximum, and then the developer can choose what to apply within that band. So that's a new approach, and I'll take you through an example in the next slide to articulate what I mean. And that we exhibited that proposal with I guess something a bit more progressive than what we have now and what was adopted. We were originally seeking to have no minimum and a low maximum. The concern from our elected representatives and the community was that that would obviously, in some cases, result in development that had no parking, and that wasn't a satisfactory outcome for them. So it's been amended to be a very low minimum and a low maximum. As I said, we'll look at an example in a moment. We also have a rate in this is all of these banded rates just apply within the areas around the railway stations and metro stations. But we have a specific rate for retail, for shops, and a different, more generous rate for regional shopping centres. And I want you to think about Chatswood Chase and Westfields, who already have quite large car parks within the CBD. We're recognising that for that type of retail, generally people will want to drive there. And we already know that there are many car trips on a weekend to those facilities. So in consultation, the concern from those landowners was that if they had to rebuild, they would have to rebuild with reduced parking rates. So, if there was some sort of an earthquake or something like that, and they had to rebuild tomorrow, they wouldn't be able to provide the same level of parking. So we've said you can keep the current rate of parking, and any new development has to be at the new, reduced rate. Other areas throughout the local government area, so not within the railway precincts of Willoughby, they are essentially unchanged. The parking rates are pretty much the same for those areas. So we're really just focusing this change along the areas of the Willoughby local government area that have great access to public transport. All right, some examples about what exactly I mean when I say reduced rates. Well, just done a little table here with some theoretical scenarios. So think about a residential flat building comprising, say, 50 units. It's within, say, 400 metres of a railway station. It's got 15 one-bedders, 30 two-bedders, and 5 three-bedders. Well, under our development control plan that's now in effect, that would have 0.1 spaces for a studio or a one-bedder, 0.2 for a two-bedder, 0.25 for a three-bedder as the minimum. And then the maximum would be 0.5 flat for all of those categories. The end calculation being you'd need to have a minimum of 9 spaces in your residential flat building of 50 units and a maximum of 25. So you can choose the low number, the high number, or anywhere in between. The advantage of this approach is, again, shifting modal split, but it also for the developer, you're you are reducing the amount of basement you're digging. Construction cost is less. You're also presumably, by digging less basement, you're improving the overall delivery timeframe of the project. And then commercial office is important as well. So we've reduced the requirements there. In an example here, 20,000 square meters of GFA, we're looking at 30 to 50 spaces and a supermarket. Roughly the size of an IGA, 1,500 square meters, that requirement would be 15 to 21 spaces. And I fully expect that residential development probably might want to push towards the maximum, and commercial office might want to push towards the minimum. We will see how that goes as we proceed with the new controls. It's not just all about parking rates. We wanted also to incentivize car share spaces in new developments. So for car share operators, the idea here is that we would trade a car share space for 10 parking spaces, acknowledging that is a significant benefit for the community to have a ride share, car share nearby, provided that is accessible to the public 24/7. So it's not a car share space just for that development. It's to serve the broader local area. And it needs to be located in an area with safe access for the community to get to, retained as common property by the owners corp, and then we would need to see some evidence through the process that that there's an arrangement with a car share operator. I want to move now to heritage. So with this particular matter, there was concern raised during the process of developing our new LEP around character in our conservation areas. A couple of developments that had where the council had allowed demolition as a result of receiving reports from the applicant that demonstrated that there was no structural integrity in the parts of the building that council was seeking to retain. So in the community, there was a concern we weren't doing enough. What we've done here is to articulate how we assess changes in our heritage conservation area and how we assess development proposals for heritage items. So what that looks like is in the local environmental plan, there was customization of the objectives. And then in the development control plan, we've articulated our intent for demolition in conservation areas, in that we would be reluctant to support them, but there needs to be a good evidence base. We realize there are some situations where that's likely to be warranted. We've added assessment considerations for demolition of heritage items. We have clarified that if there are reports submitted to us about dilapidation or structural engineering issues, that we may get them reviewed at the applicant's expense to make sure that confirm what's being said. And I guess that works on multiple levels. If it's confirmed, we've got something to say to the community members who may be concerned about demolition. And so that'll be helpful during that process. And we clarify that our intent of these controls is to avoid just retaining, we're talking about development in a heritage conservation area for maybe a contributory item that's not listed as a heritage item. We would like to see more than just the front skin of the building retained. It might be the front pitched roof or a couple of rooms in the front part of the development. So we're trying to avoid this idea of facadism where it's just a thin layer. And really, we're looking to retain as much of the fabric as we can that's visible from the street in conservation areas. So those changes were made, and you'll see those in the new local environmental plan. Regarding affordable housing, the council already had a rate of 4% affordable housing baked into its planning controls. these were usually in areas with significant development capacity. Now, what we've done here is change that rate to 10% where we're providing significant uplift and where there's feasibility analysis indicating that that 10% requirement is viable. Where it was 10% wasn't viable, for example, our Tarman, we have a reduced rate of 7%, and in Narromine and Penza Street, Willoughby South, for example, we also identified it wasn't viable there, so we're sticking with the 4% rate. What that means is when development occurs in the mapped areas, which I'll talk to in a moment, I'll show you a little map, the rate, 10% affordable housing in the case of, say, Chatswood, needs to be dedicated to council or cashed out. We have our own affordable housing development program, and there's a team within council that it develops sites that are owned by council and puts DAs in, and then those are assessed and they're put forward, and then they're outsourced to a affordable housing provider to run at reduced rates. It's a little small here, but I just wanted to give you an indication of where these rates apply. So the blue here is around the B4 mixed use areas of Chatswood. Green indicates 4% affordable housing, and then purple, which is over here in our Tarman, is the 7% rate. So it's not everywhere throughout Willoughby local government area. It's only where we have provided uplift with the controls. So we've not added this as an additional burden on existing controls. We've aligned it with our growth areas. And in parts of Chatswood, you might be thinking, well, that's 10% is pretty steep. Some places we've gone from 5 stories to allow up to 25 stories. So we're talking major uplift. So that's supporting our ask for this important community infrastructure. Next, we have the topic of urban heat. And we know that our climate is changing, and it's likely to be, particularly in hotter times of the year, even hotter. So the importance of trees and vegetation and carefully choosing our materials and making sure that development doesn't have excessive amounts of impervious area is becoming more and more important. So this new clause, 6.3 urban heat, is all about considering things like that in conjunction with our density control and our landscaping control and setbacks and soft landscaping. So it just adds a little bit of weight to that to make sure that we're addressing one of the biggest challenges ahead. Storage and plant is a change. This is a little change, but it's important because later on in these slides, I will talk to you about a battle that we are fighting in relation to developments with really, really large areas for storage and plant that are seeking modifications at later stage of the development application process, and resulting in significant variations to our controls that essentially sort of throwing out our controls as a technique to provide more habitable floor space in dwellings. So this clause is saying, well, look, excessive floor space is a problem. This is excessive floor space for storage and plant rooms. We want that to be kept to 5% of the total allowable gross floor area for a dwelling house. And so if you come in with a really large area for storage, we will be questioning that and interrogating that and wanting to get it to comply with this control. And that's something I will loop back and talk about that when we get to our approach for DAs. Lastly, EV charging. We were, in regards to electric vehicles, there's quite a high take-up of EVs throughout Willoughby, and we know that trend is likely to continue. We're eager in dwelling houses to get just a simple circuit. It's not a special circuit, some normal wiring a dedicated circuit in the garage to get those houses to be EV ready. That's the idea. Even if they don't own an electric vehicle, the house will be made EV ready, and the trigger will be a renovation, odds and adds over $100,000 to the principal dwelling, so not to a boat shed or an outhouse or a secondary dwelling or whatever. It's got to be to the main dwelling, and it's got to be involving an electrician. So we wouldn't require it for a roof replacement, for example. So if you're doing all those things, we're asking, can you put in a single circuit, very low cost? It's not a 3-phase power or anything like that. It's just a single phase 40 amp dedicated circuit in the garage. And there are other requirements also introduced in the new LEP around EV, being EV ready. For example, having cable trays in basement parks for new developments that have basements. So that's a new feature. Keeping in mind, yes, that does add additional cost. Very cheap to do if it's a requirement from the get-go and designed in. And remembering that the number of parking spaces have been reduced in those developments. So, construction costs, if it's 50 grand to dig a car space, well, you're saving many, many car spaces. There will be reduced costs in other areas of the build. We also have a sun access map that's been added to the LEP. So when you're looking at the height controls, this is really just for Chatswood. We need to be also looking at what this sun access map clause guides us to do in terms of the height of the building. So those two need to be read together. And the aim of that is saying, well, Chatswood has really, really limited open space and it's precious. Let's make sure that it's not overshadowed throughout the day when it's needed most. And that band and those bands can be read in conjunction with the height map. And sometimes there's a couple of bands that apply to a site. So wanting to make you aware of that. All right, I wanted to move on now to trends in regards to development applications, which is then going to lead us into a bit of a chat about our new way of doing development applications at Willoughby. What I'm showing you here is a bar graph about the number of DAs lodged over the last 10 years in Willoughby Council. So what you can see here is that it's declining a little bit, maybe plateauing now as a result of continuous improvements and changes by the government to its codes set, the Exempt and Compliant Development Code, taking more development out of the hands of council and putting them into the hands of private certifiers. And the upshot of that is that we're getting more complex application when you look at the pool of development that we're determining now as a council. It's more complicated, larger proposals, and it's focusing us on those, which is fair enough. That's what it was designed to do. But the trend is less DAs over time. Our determination timeframes are sitting at about 130 days on average. That was for the last year, but really it should be about half that, which is what we're aiming to do. So we're trying to bring that timeframe down. And when we look at our approval rate, so what percentage of development do we approve in Willoughby? It's 99.5% of all development is approved within Willoughby. So we offer this exceptional service to developers in the community. But the time frame is quite long, as I mentioned. So what's happening is that we are spending lots of time with applicants working through applications to make sure that they're in the best shape they can possibly be before making a determination. So, our view here is that we try to approve development if it makes sense to do so, and we are able to. And that has led to this pattern where we We work with developers over numerous amended plans. Sometimes they require re-notification, and we get comments from the community, and those processes are taking a long time. So we're mindful we need to reduce that time frame, and we're also mindful that 99.5% is a really high approval rate. So I want you to keep that in mind as we move through. There are other trends I want you to consider. So we have our planning controls, and I mentioned there's a brand new set of planning controls. But when we did the stats in June, when we look at the amount of applications lodged versus the amount of variations, generally speaking, it's about 10%. So 10% of all applications lodged are varied at the end of the day, which is interesting. That can be a challenge for us because we set these controls by consulting with government agencies, consulting with the development industry and the community, and then the councillors. And then if we're changing those controls when we're implementing them in the DA process, that can be a bit of a challenge. We are required to consider variations under clause 4.6. That's a statutory obligation. But if we vary too much, the question arises, well, why bother having a control? Where's the line in the sand? And over time, that cumulative effect can be problematic. All right, so when we vary, what controls are we varying? Well, this graph shows us in the blue just the number of variations total. And in the orange, we have the number of times within the total that we vary floor space ratio. That's the density control. So clear pattern emerging here that the most varied control is the floor space ratio control or the density control. Second most is height. Third most is this other category we had multiple, which is 1 or 2 or 3. So we're varying 10% of our applications. When we do vary, most of the variations are density. And where we vary the controls is the C4 environmental living zone, as most of our variations, and the R2 low density residential zone. So these are our zones for houses, houses basically on flat land and houses on sloping land, often harbour sites, which is really interesting. So it's not the really big development in the CBDs necessarily on the local centres. It's actually just our area for houses. And when we do vary, we already know from the previous slides that likely that's going to be density, which is a control that's really hard to justify increased floor space as a variation. Height, if you're varying height, that's something we consider often because if you've got a sloping site, it can be difficult to accommodate your floor space ratio without exceeding the height in some way. If you want to have, a series of 2 or 3 levels down a hillside, for example. So yeah, really interesting data on that front. So yes, where are our 2 zones and where are our C4 zones? R2 is the predominant color here, the pink salmon. That's our R2 zone. So think about these areas of Willoughby, Tarman, Chatswood West, Mowbray Road, Northbridge, and Castle Cove up here. And then the C4 zone is this sandy sort of yellow, light yellow color. This is Castle Cove, Middle Cove, Castle Crag, and then Northbridge. And then we've got some areas over here in the West Chatswood. So those are the areas where we're getting most of the variations. These are the things that I think are a threat to us with our fresh new local environmental plan and our new controls. So we're looking to adopt a different approach to what we did in the past, particularly in those areas. So we're taking this opportunity to strictly adhere to our new controls. And in doing that, we also want to improve our development assessment timeframes. So our new approach to assessing DAs is to say, look, the controls are maximums. We put a lot of thought and time and effort and consultation with agencies in the community and our councillors about those controls. So our strong preference is not to vary them, not to breach the controls, be that height or density or other principal development standards. Of course, we are required to consider clause 4.6 variations, and we will do that, but we will be very strictly applying the test to make sure that only, the exceptional cases and the necessary cases are varying our planning controls, so that we don't have a conversation in a year's time where we've had another 600 DAs come through and 60 of those have varied our controls within the first year, and we say, well, why do we bother creating planning controls when they're the outcome is very different from those controls. So that's where our concern is coming from. But in doing that, as a developer, you'll know that if you're within the height and density controls set by the council, you're going to have a much easier run, and it's likely that you'll have a smooth determination. If you're outside of those controls, you know that our position is strict compliance with the controls, and that's going to be a more difficult pathway. We're also going to be saying we really want to just do one assessment and one set of amended plans and then move to determination, rather than, as I said in the beginning, continuing to work through to an approval after many sets of amended plans. We absolutely want to support good development proposals where it makes sense to do so, but we want to do that quicker than what we have been doing. And we believe that clear messaging to our community that, when we say the planning controls are at 2 stories, that means your neighbour is going to be only developing at 2 stories and not 3, or 4 bedrooms and not 5. Those sort of expectations are met, and that we're also going to improve our timeframes through the process by having more efficient assessment of development applications. So that is the outline of our new approach. There are other councils that do this as well. It's not radical. The control has always said it's a maximum for height and density. We're just adhering to that more closely. And in doing that, we are spreading the word through meetings like this, and but also raising it early on in our pre-lodgement discussions. So putting a lot of our effort up front to pre-lodgement meetings to, I guess, if we've got problems, to raise them early with you, so outside of the process before you lodge if there are challenges. And also, we're hoping that on our end, there is pressure now on the staff to make sure that the applications are moving through the system quickly within just those 2 iterations, 1 DA, 1 set of amended plans. Of course, we will, in some circumstances, need to do more than that, and we will do that as a case-by-case basis. But we want to make those amendments as quickly as we can. On variations, we really, as I said, will be strictly applying the test under clause 4.6, which is much more rigorous than just saying there's no noticeable impact. We'll be looking at sloping sites, noting that those places where we've got sloping sites might need to have different or a variation to the height control, but surely not the floor space ratio control. It's not a blank check for additional density because you have a sloping site. And we'll be looking at those excessive subfloor areas with large non-habitable spaces like storage areas, for example, because we know that those often come back to us as modification applications later. So we know there are a number of tricks that can be done to work around that, and we've got a set of controls in place to reduce those excessive areas. And then, of course, you've got to follow clause 4.6 closely, and that requires a demonstration of a better planning outcome. So we're going to be focusing on that quite a bit. In communicating the change, we're having meetings like this with our key stakeholders, and thank you so much for your attendance here tonight. We're meeting with community groups as well, Department of Planning and our local planning panel, just to reiterate on these key points, and we've informed the councillors as well. So that's largely the bulk of my presentation. I just wanted to throw it open now to questions, which I understand we'll be fielding through the text. Sophia, did you want to?
Yes, thank you so much, Michelle. And now is the Q&A part. And I have collected a few questions for our members. The first one is, we got a couple of members who launched a Section 4.55 application. After waiting for a couple of months, they are still in the waiting list. They're concerned about the process duration. What kind of approach will council consider speeding up the process?
Sure. Okay. I guess I've spoken to some of those already, but we're hoping our new approach will result in a quicker timeframe for determination. What I would say, though, is that over the last year, we've had our lowest staffing rate. We're over that hump now, thank goodness. So one of our key issues was just, and I'm sure many of you would have this as well, the labour market was really tight, and we had in our team that looks at the complex development applications, we had a vacancy rate of 66% at our worst. But so we've got more planners. We're changing our approach. We've got a new system coming in to help us get rid of the antiquated one we've been working in February. To all focused on speeding up our approval process, which is something our councillors are very keen on doing.
Yeah, that's good news. And the second one is, I understand the new basics policy requires new developments to include EV charging facilities. For some developments, it will significantly increase power loads, therefore cost. What is the council's recommendation on this?
Sure. Yeah. As we were talking earlier about this is acknowledging that this is the way of the future, and that electric cars are more and more likely to be part of new developments, and an expectation from consumers. I think it's likely to have a positive effect on sale prices if you are EV ready. I think, as I mentioned, we've done other things to reduce the cost of basements. So just reducing the amount of car parking that you have to dig is a cost saving right there. Plus, we've provided in these locations where we're asking for EV charging, we've often provided significant uplift. So we haven't just sort of slapped these extra costs on without providing something back, which is the additional height and density. So totally acknowledge in some cases it's going to be more expensive if you're just looking at a cost for EV charging, but on the bigger picture, I'm sure it will stack up.
Okay, my next question is about the proposed Westchester local center. The draft proposal has been in discussion for some time. What stage is it all? Is this still happening?
The Chatswood West?
Yeah, Chatswood West.
Yeah, no, I'm aware of that discussion, and that it has been talked about, but this council doesn't have a policy or a plan or strategy that proposes any changes in that regard. So at the moment, the new LEP controls are the new LEP controls, and there's no plans to change that right now. I'm cognizant that there are new city plans on the way from the state government that this council and every other council will have to respond to, and that there are changes. This planning is not static, and we're likely to see some reconsideration of all that. So while it's not changing at the moment, I'm not ruling that out in the future.
Okay, so the next question is from our members. He, as a resident in Willoughby LGA, you might already notice the intersection of Pacific Highway and the Furler Road. especially from Pisa Highway turning into the Furler Road is a major bottleneck. Does the council have any plan for a road upgrade leading into the near future?
No, those are two state roads. So our job has been advocacy on those, and I absolutely agree that that intersection is woeful. I guess with this plan, we've tried to just reduce our reliance on cars, focusing on that public transport mode shift to make sure we're not adding to that problem, or only adding as little amounts as we possibly can get away with. So we will continue to advocate for changes on that front, but the council itself doesn't have any plans for upgrades.
Okay, thanks, Mitchell. And I saw several questions in the chat box. Do you want to pick some, or I will pick for you? I think at the time frame, I think just 5 minutes left. So
I'm happy for you to pick.
Okay, I just pick. The first one is: does the council have any plan on limiting usage of natural gas on all new buildings?
Oh, it's a good question. It has been talked about, but there is currently no policy position of this council to limit gas in new developments.
Yeah, okay, the second one is: in view of the recent WLEP in WDC.
Just one, if I'd be very keen in the chat to hear whether there's support for that or not. I don't know what the situation is from the
I know
from the development perspective.
Yes.
Sorry, go on, Sophia.
I just have a look. There's still a few questions. Is there a way to stop having those storage and plants equipment in our community?
Is there a way to stop it?
Yes.
No. If the excessive, we think the control saying 5% of the total gross floor area is going to help us stop the excessive storage. But we're not against storage spaces. I mean, we think that's fantastic. But what we tend to find is there's storage spaces with harbour views that end up leading to modification applications to produce a new habitable space, which then exceeds the floor space ratio. So we're supportive of storage spaces. Absolutely, we're totally fine with that. We're just saying, can we please keep it to 5% of the total gross floor area?
And I saw a few questions about the traffic in the chat too. There's one: has the planning panel ever considered extending the current Victoria Avenue shopping promenade to Archer Street in order to reduce unnecessary traffic, bring more safety for the school students surrounding, and creating more inviting space for the street fair in the area?
Yeah, the answer is yes. That is being considered. We want to enhance that great pedestrian environment and our iconic Victoria Ave, but it's no firm plans to pedestrianize it right now.
Okay, and the next question is: what is Willoughby Council's take of the to be announced new SSD policy?
Oh, if that's the one that's about if you provide 15% affordable housing for 15 years, you get a 30% increase to your height control and 30% increase to your density control. We've got our fresh, shiny new local environmental plan that already delivers affordable housing permanently at 10%, and sets maximums based on overshadowing urban design principles like setbacks and scale and public realm considerations. So we feel like we've worked on this for 5 years and created a great new set of growth plans, only to have this scheme come in and trump our controls and vary them by 30%. So we are not a fan.
Okay, and the last question is: what's council's view on the new 30% FSR? And
that's the same one. Yeah, that's the same initiative. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And thank you, everyone. And Jen, do you have anything to share with us? Do you want to share something with us tonight? No, okay, it's okay. Thank you so much, Michelle, for sharing such content with us tonight. And thanks Willoughby Council's support for this event. And also thank you to all our viewers for joining us tonight. If you would like to be more involved in our events, please subscribe to our WeChat official account. If you would like to become our member, please add our WeChat assistant for more information. Don't forget, all of our recording for our events will be on our YouTube channel. So just search Chinese Beauty Association of New South Wales and subscribe. You can find all our past and future recording there. And thank you for supporting the CBA-NSW, and that concludes our program for tonight. See you next time, and everyone in front of the screen. Thank you, Michelle, and thanks, Jen.
Thank you so
Bye.
much.
Bye. Have a great night, everyone.